Hi there, welcome to Lawful Rebel TV. And on today's show, we're going to be exploding the myths of how wonderful electric cars are. And it's a great pleasure to be joined by Pete Stone. Pete, thank you for joining us.
Hello, it's good to be here.
So we're going to discuss electric cars. They're going to save the planet and all this good stuff. Pete, this isn't exactly true, is it? There seems to be some fundamental problems with the claims of the whole concept of an electric car. What's the most fundamental one? Is it the efficiency argument, do you think?
I think what they're doing is they're moving the efficiency of the motor and they're trying to apply it to the whole car. So they will say that the electric motor is more efficient than the internal combustion engine, which is true. Now, they do mess around with the figures a little bit, which I've noticed. I mean, they'll try and make out that an internal combustion engine is only 30% efficient, and then they'll say that an electric motor is about 95. Well, that's the low end of an internal combustion engine, and 95% efficiency is extremely high end, and it's not reality. Both of these motors use energy, and they lose energy through heat and sound. So obviously the internal combustion engine is obvious, it's a lot more noisier than electric motor. But what is being missed, and I think this is deliberate, what is being missed is the overall car itself. Don't just focus on the motor. So the motor on its own, yes, the internal combustion engine is about, in reality, more closer to, say, 45% efficient or 40. See, again, it depends. When you're saying internal combustion engine, what engine are we talking about? Are we talking about a Formula One engine? Because some of these Formula One cars, they are like, you can get a 1.5 Formula One car producing 1,500 brake horsepower.
Okay, so we've got to make sure we're comparing like with like, and we've also got to make sure we're bearing in mind the full context when we talk about what engine is better. So the whole argument is basically centered on fossil fuels and the burning of alleged fossil fuels, abiotic hydrocarbons. It's alleged that burning these is going to destroy the climate through runaway climate change. So the argument goes that we mustn't burn fossil fuels as a very efficient and useful means of carrying fuel to burn for things like cars, trains, and aeroplanes, particularly. So the argument is that we need to move to electric cars. But is it? So you've already sort of alluded there, Pete, that the efficiency is slightly tinkered with, isn't it? I mean, am I right in thinking that the average sort of saloon car or family car, petrol and diesel engines are, what are they, around about 35–40% efficient?
About 40, yeah. I mean, you can play with the numbers a little bit. And if you forget about, turbocharging, supercharging, some of these exotic racing engines that can get higher efficiencies, just take a normal family car. I think at the moment, the most efficient one is a Toyota, might be a saloon car, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a 2-litre petrol, and I think it's about 42% efficient.
Okay, and what would you be looking at for a diesel?
Diesel is about 55. Okay. Again, you can play with the numbers, but it's about 55%.
So what would be a realistic figure to assign to an electric car, whether it's a Tesla? I'm not sure what's on the market out there, but the state of the art, the current market electric car, what are we looking at in terms of their efficiency?
It's closer to 70. So electric motor, this is where it gets a little bit difficult when you're talking about efficiencies. The motors themselves are the closer to 70% efficient because they still generate a lot of heat. I mean, a lot of these electric cars still have a cooling system in them to keep the batteries cool and keep the motors cool. And they make some noise, but not quite a lot. So in reality, if you're just talking motors, forget the car at the moment, if you're just talking motors, a petrol motor is about 40% efficient today. Diesel's about 55, and the electric motor is about 70. And again, anyone watching this, you can play with the numbers all you want. that's fine. But this is just a ballpark. Those are the sort of figures that you want to be thinking about.
So on the surface of that, though, the electric car's got a head start there. It sounds good. It's 70% efficient. That's a higher efficiency. So what are the complications behind that, though? Because an electric car isn't carrying its own liquid fuel with it. It's the battery cost, the production costs. How's that? How does the inefficiency first relate to the fact that it's a battery operated system?
It's when you place these two motors into a car is when the problems start to happen, because the motors have to carry themselves and they have to carry the car and the occupant. So they have to have enough power to move the car, if you like, which also means that the motor has to carry all its energy requirements with it. And this is when the electric car starts to fail. Because if we touch on the internal combustion engine, it doesn't have to carry all of its energy with it. It only has to carry the fuel, which would be the petrol or the diesel. Because as the car drives along, it actually sucks in oxygen, sucks in air, and it's the oxygen combined with the fuel that creates the energy. So the internal combustion engine, I think roughly you're looking at about a quarter fuel and 3/4 oxygen. And now the car, the internal combustion engine, does not have to carry that air with it. Now with the electric car, it has to carry all of its energy 100% of the time. It's got no other choice. And then
so that's a weight penalty essentially, yeah.
Yeah, well,
in that it's got to carry the batteries.
Well, yeah, we can get onto the batteries itself, because the batteries is a secondary problem, but it's the energy. So try and think about the energy itself. It's not something you can sort of quantify, or there's no sort of weight to it. Although the fuel has weight, it's the energy that the engine can produce, where an internal combustion engine only has to carry the fuel, doesn't have to carry the oxygen. Whereas an electric car has to carry 100% of the energy in the form of electricity. So this is just physics. So physics is already against the electric car. And then we get to the reality of how does the electric car carry its energy, and it's a battery. And then you start looking at the heavy cost of producing the battery, the weight of the battery, and the dangers that some of these batteries have got today.
You mean with thermal runaway and things with lithium-ion batteries?
That's right. That's right. The only way that the modern electric car is it can't compete, but it's trying to compete with the internal combustion engine, is to force these batteries to hold or produce more energy, more electrical current, if that makes sense. And the only way they can do that is by using more volatile metals, so like lithium. I mean, lithium is an extremely volatile metal, and it will actually basically explode when placed in water. It reacts.
Does this place limitations on the battery's use in particularly warm climates or particularly cold climates, for that matter? Is the usable range of temperature narrowed with a battery-operated electric car?
That's right. Yeah, that's another problem. What tends to happen with these batteries is if they get too hot or they get too cold, they become very inefficient. In some cases, they can lose their charge, or the flow of the electrons within the battery is not as good. I think, like, if you've got an electric car, it's not going to run below about -5 degrees. Once you start getting below that, the electric battery and the whole system doesn't function. The battery goes flat. People are finding this out already in places like Canada. So when they get their normal winters, the electric car doesn't want to know. You can charge it up all you want, and they're finding that they're charging the car up all the time throughout the whole day, and then they disconnect the charger, and then the electric car still doesn't work.
Right. So you've got that's another disadvantage of the electric powered car. What about range and the fact that over the life of a battery, say a battery lasts 10 years, I don't know what the exact figure is.
I can touch on that, yeah. A typical battery lasts about 3,000 cycles, which means you can charge it up and discharge it. A typical lithium battery is about 3,000 cycles. Now, again, this is another propaganda piece, is that the government, if you like, are saying, well, you charge it up 300 times a year, that's 10 years. Well, that's not true, because what happens is every time you charge the battery up, you slightly damage the battery, and then the following charge is never as good as the last one. So it's like diminishing returns.
Yeah.
So every time you charge it, you get less back, less back, less back. So the half-life of these batteries is like 1,500 cycles, and after that, you've got to be charging that battery up very, very regularly. So this 10-year thing, there's a lot of people out, propaganda saying, oh, these batteries last 10 years. They don't, and they're not now. I mean, electric cars built 10 years ago are starting to, well, we've already failed on the second battery.
Okay, so battery life is a key factor. Cost, I guess, is also a key factor. I know these batteries there are quite contentious minerals and components to them. They've been connected with various dodgy mining practices, perhaps. I don't know. Obviously, mobile phones are implicated similarly. But so the batteries are a problem. Is it true that the average electric car is carrying the equivalent of a couple of passengers around in additional weight just because they're having to carry their batteries? Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the weight of these batteries, especially the Teslas, is between 2 and 3 passengers all the time. And this is another reason why these electric cars are always so flimsy. If you take a look at the electric car and you compare it to the internal combustion engine, these cars are stripped, if you like. All the luxuries are removed. They have thinner glass. The tires are thinner as well, so that the rolling resistance is reduced. Electric cars play heavily on aerodynamics. They'll often try and cover the rear wheels, make a slippery shape and all this, and trying everything they can to try and make up for the lack of energy that they
trying to increase that overall efficiency. So
yes.
Supposing, I've got a family with 3 children, we're a family of 5, we go off on our summer holidays, we jump in our transporter, and it happens to be diesel, so we'll fill that out with about 10 gallons, and it gives us a range of probably all the way down to Cornwall and back. It's about 300 miles. We've got about 600-mile range. Obviously, we can get down there fairly swiftly. I mean, what would we be looking at in a? Do you think? I mean, there obviously isn't a direct comparison electric vehicle on the market at the moment, but going by electric car, would we be able to get all the way down there in one hit?
Unlikely, especially if you've loaded up your car. I mean, if you've got all your passengers in there and you've got all your luggage. I mean, if you're going to tow something, you've got no chance, because this is the problem with these electric cars, is they've got so little energy that the more weight that you apply to these electric cars, the quicker they burn through the energy.
Yeah.
So what happens is the more weight you add, the quicker it burns through the energy, the flatter the battery becomes, and then the more stops you have to make to recharge. And a typical recharge is about an hour. Now, I know there's some people out there that might say, oh, you can do a speed charge for like 30 minutes. Yeah, but that damages the battery even quicker.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, the thing is with these speed chargers, yeah, you can do it in 30 minutes. But if it was acceptable to do these speed charges for 30 minutes, why do the slow 60-minute charge? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And the reason for these speed charges is if you're in emergency, or can't wait an hour. But yeah, the trade-off is you're going to burn through your battery quicker. So going back to the energy, on your hypothetical, you go on holiday, instead of, you could probably do it on one tank there and back, but on the electric one, you'd probably have to stop at least twice to recharge. You've got to factor that in. And then you multiply that. Say if everybody went on holiday with their electric vehicles, and every single electric vehicle needed an hour to charge up instead of just 5 minutes to fill up your tank, you can see how the time escalates, and you're just going to have gridlock. In fact, we've had that. In fact, just the other day, it was I think it was California, in all the Teslas. They're all queuing up. And yeah, they've just sat there because every single Tesla needed an hour to charge. So we've already seen it at the moment.
So it's really fashionable, isn't it? Obviously, you can virtue signal if you've got an electric car. You're doing the right thing to save the planet, which, as we talk about elsewhere on this channel, is unfortunately a false premise. There is no reason, to worry about burning abiotic hydrocarbons. They're a good form of energy, and
Yes.
it's by no means certain that more CO2 in the air will cause a problem. It might even be a benefit. This is how serious these things are. People need to look into. But what about other types of car, Pete? What about, I've had friends say, well, where are the hydrogen cars? Now, surely that's a good idea. Water, you can break it by electrolysis, I believe, into hydrogen and oxygen. Excellent, you got your own fuel. It sounds too good to be true. We have had hydrogen cars. What's happened with that story, Pete?
Well, it's a similar sort of situation with the electric cars. I mean, it depends if you're going to use, say, for example, an internal combustion engine, and you're just going to run gas, which we've got. We've got LPGs, liquid petroleum gas. That's a thing. But that's if you just take the gas on board into a tank and then just drive the car. But it's when these so-called hydrogen cars, or the claim is made that you just pour water into the tank and then it can create its own hydrogen, and then it can power an internal combustion engine. Well, it's the same problem with electric cars. You have to carry everything, so it's a power to weight ratio or energy to weight ratio, because you've got to carry all that equipment that converts water into hydrogen everywhere you go. And then that's why these hydrogen cars won't work. It's okay if you, I don't know, break the hydrogen down at home in your garage, and then you store the gas, and then I suppose you could then fit a gas tank to your internal combustion engine. That's fine, but you can't just pour water into a car and then it converts into hydrogen.
No, there have been hydrogen powered cars. We've seen them. People have made them. They seem to have sort of disappeared and not caught on. And although some people may cry stories of suppression and stuff, it would seem that they're just they don't have enough merit in and of themselves to really be a successful option. So, and I mean, with the electric cars, another major fault with them in terms of generally serving human well-being, of course, is the fact that you're sitting in a really dangerous electromagnetic field. There's stacks of information available about the potential harmful effects of pulsed microwave radiations, electric fields, and magnetic fields. The information is freely available, and to sit in is it you're looking at two motors, one in front of you and one behind you? Is that right, Pete? In one of these electric cars,
or some it's two side by side.
Okay.
So you've got two motors side by side, but some have one motor at the front and one behind you. I think the Teslas have like one behind you and one in the front.
Right, but I mean that's another whole unexplored thing. It is known, it can be proven, it's a fact that electromagnetic fields negatively impact you, and to sit in anywhere near a spinning motor, sleeping near a fridge, for example, is known to people recommend against doing things like that. So sitting in a car next to a spinning motors, it would be very akin to sleeping next to your fridge freezer with a motor in it, and harmful for all the same reasons. So that's yet another reason to avoid electric cars. What other options are there, Pete, that you know of in the alternatives to the conventional diesel or fuel or petrol powered car?
Petrol powered, I mean, at this moment in time, there are no options. I mean, we should talk about the fact that everyone uses the term fossil fuels, and really they're abiotic hydrocarbons. So we have to unpack that a little bit, because everyone's saying peak oil and we're going to run out of oil and all this sort of stuff, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all. In fact, right now in today's economy, we have a glut of oil. We have too much of it, and oil is the second most abundant fluid on the planet, and the first would be water. Now, the abiotic hydrocarbon theory is, and it's the one that fits, is that oil has nothing to do with biomatter, but it is produced much deeper at the Earth's core, and the Earth is always producing oil, and it's always seeping up to the surface. And in fact, there's even reports where oil fields that dried out in the 70s are now beginning to fill back up again.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into geopolitics or what's going on in the Middle East, but what's going on in the Middle East is really the suppression of all this extra abundant oil. So third world countries are not allowed to use their oil, and this is in an attempt for Western governments to artificially prop up the price. So when you start looking at the true cost of producing oil, if we just look at the cost of a barrel of oil, I mean, Libya is pulling 1 barrel of oil out of the ground for about 50 cents a barrel, and each barrel has about 42 gallons. And I think the top end, the most expensive, is about $8. So normally the norm is somewhere between $3 and $8 per barrel. That's what it costs to get it out of the ground.
Gosh. Yeah,
very cheap.
There's a big markup going on there.
Massive,
massive
markup.
What about also you're saying they're not fossil fuels? Is it true that that not many dinosaur fossils are found below depths of about 15 and 16,000 feet, if I've heard correctly?
Yep.
Only,
Absolutely.
And oil, I know, is drilled considerably deeper than that, isn't it? How deep do they go down with oil? It must be 20, 30,000 plus, isn't it?
It is 30,000 feet, yeah, it is. I mean, we are drilling twice the depth of the fossil record, way below the fossil record. So
yeah.
it doesn't fit. The fossil fuel narrative was basically an advertising campaign back when oil began to become useful. So it was always, scientists guess where it came from, and the idea that it was fossil fuels was liked by the oil companies because it gave it some sort of mystique. It was like, it's going to run out. It was made 65 million years ago. We can use it for a short while, and that's why it's so expensive. Yeah. But peak oil is a scam. Again, peak oil, if we just touch on peak oil, the scam behind peak oil is that if you understand how the financial system works and the petrodollar, and you understand where inflation comes from, which is basically first world governments just printing more and more fiat currency and putting it into circulation, then what's happening is that the prices of everything is going to escalate just because of the law of supply and demand. The more notes in circulation, the more notes you need to buy an item. So they can see that the price of oil was going to forever go up. And to try and give an excuse as to why oil was always going up, they came up with the live peak oil. So if you think of a bell curve, the government said, by the 70s, that is going to be peak oil, which means from then on, we're going to start using it up, which means there's going to be less and less oil, and therefore, that's why it's more expensive. So that is where the live peak oil came from. But in reality, there's more oil today than there has ever been.
It does make sense when you just think about an industry wanting to sell their product. It's in their interest for everybody to think it's pretty rare. That isn't new, and it's but oil scores points simply because it's such a versatile fuel. For aeroplanes and carrying this abiotic hydrocarbon around, and it's such an efficient way of directly producing energy where you need it. As you say, it burns oxygen as and where it is in the Earth's atmosphere. It's got so many advantages that really outcompete these other sort of forms, electric cars, hydrogen cars. It's a shame that so much, I mean, the pollution is a bad idea. It's a shame that so much emphasis is placed on the pollution. And I think this is a classic example where issues are mixed. There's carbon dioxide on that side and there's pollution. Carbon dioxide is essential for life. Pollution, airborne sort of microtoxins and things obviously is a bad idea. So we need to separate the two issues of pollution and carbon dioxide, because as I understand it, catalytic converter technology's come on a long way, isn't it, Pete? I mean, how clean can a petrol or diesel engine burn these days?
I think the average person now knows that what comes out the exhaust of the internal combustion engine is carbon dioxide,
the gas of life, if you like. So it's not toxic in any way. But then they'll still point to carbon monoxide, because they'll say, well, carbon monoxide still comes out of the exhaust pipe of of a car. Well, yeah, but it's such a minute amount that it's not even worth bothering about. And then when you realize that carbon monoxide is also naturally produced, this is when things start to smell a bit fishy, because volcanoes produce carbon monoxide.
It's present in the atmosphere. To some degree. It's one of the So I mean, ultimately, the ability to clean up petrol and diesel burning cars is increasing all the time, isn't it? And it's not beyond the wit of man to take it further. Always a good idea not to breathe in particulates. So it doesn't. It looks like pure efficiency. The use case, the end use case. I wouldn't be persuaded to exchange my VW transporter for an electric equivalent. No. Just on what I've heard about battery life, costs, inefficiencies, lack of performance, inconvenience, ill health. Ill health's a massive one for me. I wouldn't want my family to be sitting in an electric car. But are there any advantages? I mean, let's not be unfair to the electric car.
Well, it's a novelty, or it's. But there's no plus points to it. I mean, it's not that I'm dismissing all electric vehicles. So if you're saying electric vehicle, well, yes, there's probably a place for electric vehicles.
Sure.
For example, if you're in a factory or something and you need to carry things around, it's probably a good idea to have an electric forklift or something, or those sort of things.
Even then, with an appropriate health caveat, because one shouldn't spend one's working day in the environment of a spinning motor. It's just that's something that everybody needs to research, but look into electromagnetic fields and their effects on our health. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, put that to one side. But when you're talking about a family car, then no, there is no reason to have an electric car at all. Because the other question you've got to ask yourself is, where is the electricity coming from?
Good point.
So, this is when economics comes into play. Because what's actually happening is that these electric cars obviously get their electricity from a power station, which is powered by abiotic hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal. But if you understand a little bit about physics,
nuclear, to be fair, or nuclear.
Yeah, you can use nuclear. It could be. Depends in your country, though. Some countries, they're a bit low on the nuclear. But at the moment, I think the UK, we use coal-fired, and we use, which are now actually wood burning. We've actually got some of our power stations that used to use coal, but are now being converted to burn wood. And the wood comes from America and Canada, where they actually chop down the rainforest, and turn it into wood chips, then transport it over to the UK and burn it in these power stations. So if you've got an electric car, you are contributing to deforestation. So,
and we ought to also mention the inefficiencies there, because if the electric car is expending its energy at a rate of 70, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say 80-85% efficiency. If its electricity has ultimately, it's had a charge for its batteries have been topped up with energy coming from a power station that's burning coal at, I don't know, 50% efficiency.
That's right, 50%.
So that they're on the back foot before they've started there, haven't they? There's a 50% loss to occur for.
That's right. You've lost half of your energy straight away.
So in some way of summary there, Pete, there would seem to be very few reasons at all to invest in an electric car. Would you agree?
Absolutely. There's no... I mean, in the free market, no one would, but we don't have a free market.
No.
So
when you buy an electric car, you're benefiting from huge subsidy, aren't you?
That's right, you are. I mean, Tesla's, I think, you get £3,500 or something like that, and the Tesla company itself is receiving subsidies. So the factory and Elon Musk receives subsidies. I think he's got something like 19 billion so far, and to support his electric car and all these other things. And then the consumer is
make it work, Elon. Make it work.
Yeah,
That's your assignment.
Yeah. And then, like I say, the consumer who actually buys the electric car is given a £3,500 or whatever added, and then the petrol car is demonized. It's taxed. So even when you buy a petrol car in America, you're hit with the gas guzzling tax. So an extra £1,000 is added on top because it uses abiotic hydrocarbons. People call fossil fuels.
Well, hey ho. I mean, everybody, I think it's important to join the dots and to look into the whole climate change debate, because there are facts of reality that are contradicted by the official narrative, and you just have to look into that, everybody. You have to examine that CO2 really isn't a problem, and hence, really, this is the underlying driver behind electric cars, and they're really a non-solution to a non-problem. So I would not recommend getting behind the wheel of an electric car.
No, not at all.
As always, check out the website lawfulrebel.com. Loads more on there, and hopefully we'll see you again on Lawful Rebel TV. Cheers from me.
Bye from me.
Be